made them competitive. Today, I'm announcing a new plan to protect the integrity of our immigration system. Federal law prohibits the entry of communists and totalitarians into the United States. But my question is, what do we do with the ones that are already here that grew up in it? I think we have to pass a new law for them. Using federal law in Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, I will order my government to deny entry to all communists and all Marxists. Those who come to and join our country must love our country. We want them to love our country. We don't want them when they want to destroy our country. Welcome to America. We want to destroy your country. Thank you very much. So we're going to keep foreign Christian-hating communists, Marxists, and socialists out of America. We're keeping them out of America.
The MAGA communists, you guys come right to Mar-a-Lago. We got some great fun planned for y'all. Hey, y'all. Matt Leck here, David Griscom, episode 124 of Left Reckoning. How you doing, David?
I'm doing good, brother. Dark, dark day for the MAGA communist morons. To see the
or is it a confirmation? Or is it a confirmation that actually everything is been going perfectly and we got Trump right where we want him? He needs to get to the bottom before we need to break him down before we can build him back up into this Napoleonic champion of communism that we all know that he really deep down essentially is. But folks, we got a good show. Speaking of those guys, I think probably busy taking down their Prigozhin merchandise. We have some interesting stuff happened in Russia recently that we're going to get to. But before we get to that and have Yasha Levine on, let's talk about it. That happened, and Rick Scott is trying to surf the same wave. Here he is. Let's just get a little taste of him.
Senator Rick Scott here. Let me give you a travel warning. If you're a socialist, communist, somebody that believes in big government, I would think twice. Think twice if you're thinking about taking a vacation or moving to Florida. We're the free state of Florida. We actually don't believe in socialism. We actually know people, and some people in our state lived under it, and we know people lived under socialism. It's not good. It's not good for anybody. So if you're thinking about it, if you think about coming to Florida and you're a socialist or communist, think twice. We like freedom, liberty, capitalism, things like that.
Yeah, now the thing is I don't know why they don't feel the need to take a second cut or prepare.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Things. But it doesn't really matter. Like ultimately, that their lack of technical and production skill, this is pretty alarming. And I think I just can't help. I was on vacation when you talked about this, but the whole signing the anti-socialist bill that like Ro Khanna participated in, and even like Pramila Jayapal knew not to, but like a lot of like. Was it Warren that also did it too? I should know specifically who did that, but like that stuff is actually worrying to me, despite how like ludicrous these figures seem.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a part of this that this is just good old American tradition, but remember that things can slide really quickly. I mean, looking for example at like opinion poll, and look at something that folks thought was settled, like gay marriage in this country. Look how quickly the right has been able to whip up their base in a frenzy about it. I wouldn't sit too comfortable and think that there's no potential of there ever being a kind of backslide on civil and political rights for people. Remember that right now, to be a citizen of this country, there already is a section, for example, denying citizenship in the United States if you're a member of a communist party or a totalitarian party, as they describe it. And as Liza Featherstone wrote in Jacobin, despite McCarthy and McCarthyism sort of being used as an insult for the most part in American politics, there are a lot of these laws that are still on the books. And recently, just this month, CPUSA members were refused a booth at the Oklahoma City Pride Festival because of a 1955 McCarthyite law declaring Communist Party membership illegal in the state. And, there's been pretty significant Supreme Court rulings on this. But in this country, there are still a lot of these old anti-communist laws that are on the books, anti-communist, anti-socialist, in states like New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Alabama, California, Washington, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Despite the Supreme Court's ruling against Washington's law, a 2012 legislative effort to repeal it failed. So there's not only a tradition of it, there's a lot of things that are just sort of sitting there that just have been unused for a prolonged period in American politics and history. So look, I don't think it's worth getting breathless about this kind of stuff, obviously. But also I don't think it's appropriate or correct to tell people to not be worried, for example, about this kind of increase in rhetoric, as funny as it is when Trump is trying to remember what code he's going to use.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's alarming in the sense that there have been two sort of main narratives I remember in terms of the political economy, which is that, oh yeah, don't intervene in that at all. The capitalists will deal with it, and the free market is the way. And now it's actually nobody really believes that. It's just how is the government going to intervene? Is it going to be in any kind of democratic fashion, or is it going to be for corporations?
Yeah.
And that you see this being developed is, I think, as a reaction, because that's the only way that sort of ideology wins is repression, whether violent or other means. So yeah.
And last thing, not that it needs to be said again, but those MAGA communism weirdos taking another big L when dear leader Mr. Trump says he's coming for them.
Yeah. Yeah, love you guys. Love your YouTube streams. I watch them. I am a little bit like Lenin. All right, folks. Now I want to welcome to the show journalist Yasha Levine. Yasha is journalist at yasha.substack.com. Also co-host of the podcast along with Evgenia Kovja of The Russians, and author of a book I can't recommend enough, Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet, which is a topic that people have gotten really interested in lately, and I would recommend checking out Yasha's book. Yasha, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just ignore my, I know it's summer, but I'm in San Francisco, so this is how you have to be outside at 4 p.m. On a June afternoon.
Oh man, I'm jealous.
It's pretty nice actually. But yeah, no, I mean I got 2 layers of socks. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been catching up with The Russians. You and Evgenia did a recap on the year anniversary last February, and you just released an episode this afternoon on what we're talking about, or what sort of brought this up again. Because Dave and I haven't gotten too deep into we're not experts in this conflict. We're not following the OPSEC stuff, but something major happened last weekend with Prigozhin and an apparent sort of Bacon's rebellion style revolt against the structure, but not the king, because he wasn't really going against. What happened last week, Yasha?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone really knows what actually happened. I mean, what's pretty clear is that when you, do this kind of war, do this kind of invasion, and do this almost total mobilization of your society against in a war, against your neighbor, against essentially a kind of kindred culture and against the kindred people. And you pump the country full of, wartime propaganda, and you activate the most reactionary, sort of nationalistic, patriotic elements in society. You give them weapons, you send them to the front, you promote these people, you make them into heroes. You also use shadowy groups that like the Wagner group that we're going to talk about now, that's headed by this guy named Yevgeny Prigozhin, and make them sort of central heroes in the narrative against in your fight against the West, against NATO, against liberal values, against Ukraine, against Nazis. Weird shit starts to happen. Weird shit can happen in Russian history. These kinds of things have happened before in the past, and so. No one really knows what happened. I mean, what we know is some facts, I guess, some basic facts. We know that the head of this private and paramilitary organization called the Wagner Group, this guy named Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's been a rising sort of star, rising player in Russian, I don't know, dare I say, deep state politics, who's started out as a kind of a petty thief in the Soviet Union, went into business in the late 90s during the kind of perestroika and the loosening up of the economy, selling hot dogs in this outdoor market in the center of St. Petersburg, in the center of Leningrad, and then St. Petersburg, and kind of moved up into different business ventures, restaurants, casinos, ransom restaurants that famously Putin and George Bush, when he made a state visit to Russia in 2002 with his wife Laura, actually ate at. And so there's pictures of Prigozhin kind of hanging out in the background behind Putin and George Bush and Laura Bush in 2002 on a floating restaurant that Prigozhin owned at the time. Weird stuff like that. And then he moved up and started handling all sorts of shadowy things for the government. He had some kind of connection to Putin. He ran a catering company. It serviced various official functions, provided catering. He then kind of in a very covert way launched this private paramilitary organization, Wagner Group, that was first involved in 2014 conflict in Ukraine, and then was really heavily involved in the Syrian conflict. But all this time, Prigozhin denied that he was involved in it at all. And it was a very shadowy organization. Again, it was very visible. A lot of people covering the Syrian conflict, but like actual structure was never confirmed about who controlled it, who was the guy behind the scenes. And only in 2002, after this war began, he said, no, I am the guy behind this organization. I am the guy behind Wagner Group, and started being a very, very public face of this organization. And it took a kind of a very visible role in this war in Ukraine since the invasion. And he's taken a very visible position in there, in that he's always doing these off the cuffs interviews, kind of being candid and kind of populist and honest, about sort of the mistakes and sort of the problems with official military structures that he sees it. And he's been feuding with the sort of the official Ministry of Defense structures that he's sort of subservient to them, right? He's sort of outside of them, but also subservient to them, because all the money that he has, all the equipment that he gets, all the ammo, all the heavy sort of, machinery that he uses and that his troops use, or his group uses in the front in the war, comes from the Ministry of Defense. But he's been having this increasing feud with the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, who is like a kind of he's Putin's guy. He's been around for a long time, and he's constantly there's rumors that he might be the next appointed, leader of Russia. Like he's kind of as if he's being groomed. I mean, there are all these rumors. It's not clear if you can believe them or not, but he's Putin's guy. And so Prigozhin has been very, very aggressively and kind of in an interesting way fighting this, essentially like a YouTube war, against this guy, because he would just sit down and do these interviews, and he would just really lean into him. I mean, just like in a way that was, you don't do that unless you're either insane and have a death wish, or you have some kind of something behind you, standing behind you, or you think you have someone standing behind you. And so this escalated, and I think part of the conflict was that there's been attempts by the Ministry of Defense to essentially disband the Wagner Group and kind of absorb it into official military structures. At least, again, these are the sort of the rumors that have been swirling around. And so all of that conflict, that Prigozhin had with Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, and sort of the official, sort of security state structures, came to a head where apparently he claims his base, where the Wagner Group soldiers were stationed in eastern Ukraine, got bombed by the military, by the Russian military. So by his own guys, essentially. And that was like the final straw. He says, again, this is a sort of like, you have to take him on his word about that's what happened. And he's decided that he can't take it anymore. He's not going to let these guys kill his boys. And, and in fact, like these guys that are, Putin's essentially like a security state elite are the problem why the war's been going badly. They're the reason why everything's fucked up. They're lying to Putin. They're stealing, every chance they get. They're pocketing all this money. They're corrupt. They don't know what's going on. They don't really care about Russia. They don't care about a great Russia. We're losing because of them. And I'm going to do this march on Russia to make sure that people know, like to make people know that this is an issue and that it needs to be rectified. And he kind of gave this 30-minute speech. It was pretty interesting. It was very populist. It was very he talked a lot about how the entire security apparatus, including the KGB, including the Ministry of Defense, is very corrupt. Uses every possible way to enrich themselves and doesn't really care about winning the war. And and although he never criticized Putin directly, he never really praised him either, which I found to be very strange. Like, if this is a guy just saying, there's this whole, in Russia, there's this thing. It's like the Tsar is always blameless. It's always the boyars that are the problem, right? And if only the Tsar knew what was going on, because the Tsar is always like, good and perfect and blameless, like then he would step in and rectify the situation. If that's kind of what he was doing, and on one level that is what he was doing from the rhetoric, but he didn't praise Putin enough. Like he didn't like say like Putin was doing an amazing job. He has the best interest of the people, but it's just his it's the people who he's appointed to wage this war. They're fucked up, but Putin's great. He never really said that. And so it was a very strange thing. And so he did that. He marched on Rostov. He very easily captured or took control of the local. Rostov is a pretty big city down in southern Russia, just across the border from eastern Ukraine. And so he took control of the sort of the provincial military headquarters there. I don't think, from what I understand, there aren't a lot of troops stationed there. It's more like, more like an office building. And so, but he still took control of it, was able to get some of the top leadership guys there and basically have them sit down with him. And he's fully equipped with a machine gun. They're disarmed. They're just sitting there kind of in their slippers, looking kind of skittish a little bit, and so he took control of that, and he said he was going to march on Moscow and send his guys to Moscow to kind of take it. It's not clear what he wanted to do, but he wanted, I guess, Shoigu to step down, or he wanted him turned over to the Wagner group so they could like deal with him, and so he never really made it to Moscow. Lukashenko, as it turns out, was in the middle of negotiating with him and convinced him to turn around, because he said that Putin had made the decision to exterminate Prigozhin and exterminate this column of Wagner soldiers that were making their way to Moscow. And Lukashenko said he talked Putin down and said that, look, you can just come to Belarus, kind of hang out here for a while, and and sort of fix the situation. And then Prigozhin, after he aborted the mission, aborted this, I don't know what you call it, like a mutiny or whatever it was. He aborted it, and I don't know if he was already in Belarus or if he was one of his stations, one of his bases in eastern Ukraine. But he gave this he gave this spiel about how essentially this wasn't a coup, this wasn't a mutiny, this was like a march for justice. He was like a march for justice for the Russian people, and basically that's what happened. I mean, that's just the sort of the facts of the case about what there's so much speculation. I mean, this is one of these events where, like, I don't know, just the full-on ridiculousness of sort of the Russia expert, community, and now it's gotten even more ridiculous with just, I don't know, social media is like everyone is a fucking expert. Everyone, yet almost none of these people even can like read Russian or speak Russian and know very little about Russia itself. They just sort of, it just breaks down into camps, and people like talk about what they want to believe or what they want to happen. So you have like on the sort of the American liberal kind of neocon side, Democratic Party, you have them cheering, Prigozhin's attempted coup because they think that it'll destabilize Putin and that anybody other than Putin is great because they'll be weaker than Putin. But it's like, wait, so you want just some random thug that you don't even know much about to take control of the Russian state and potentially take control of its military and its nuclear arsenal just because it'll make Putin weaker. So you just have like that kind of extremist almost position, totally insane. Also very, very, delusional, because it was clear that whatever the larger forces that are around this conflict, and no one really knows what's actually going on. It's clear that this probably wasn't going to happen, So there's the fantasies on that side, going down to the sort of these kind of strange, I don't know, like these kind of weird people that this imperialist kind of leftist who think that Putin is fighting a war for the global South, and that he's actually, fighting for justice, geopolitical justice or something, like thinking and also but believing that Putin is infallible and Putin is actually smarter than anyone else in the room or anyone else in the world. And so this can't be that Putin this can't show that Putin's weak or that there's like fractures within his government, within his state, among different clans. That this is like Putin's way of playing this 5D chess of, I don't know, like purging weak elements from, his government in this sneaky fashion. So you have like this whole like, very big wide spectrum of fantasies and analyses, of what's actually going on. And so, yeah.
I mean, the some of the breathless stuff that was coming out, when this event started were truly amazing. I mean, I was seeing people like very confidently saying that he had sort of captured, maybe even potentially like nuclear weapons, and things like that, right? Which is just like, the confidence and the bravado, which a lot of people start talking about Russia, is something that truly,
like brainless regime change. Like they've just decided like we want a brainless regime change, even though we don't want to say that's actually what one of our interests is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people are pretty clear about it, to decolonize Russia. I mean, it's kind of a meme now at this point, like you just want to cut, Russia into like, 100 different municipalities and principalities.
That
and
will work out really nice.
and have them whatever, and so, I mean, but yeah, it's the whole thing is, the whole thing is just, it's interesting because, Prigozhin, actually, what he says, what he said in his like initial address that kind of launched, that he made this, he did this kind of manifesto almost like online, on YouTube, and then like posted it and just like waited a day and then like marched, like to see what would happen. No one appeased him, so he like marched on Moscow. When he made that speech, I mean, a lot of it, he's arguing from almost a more nationalistic perspective. I don't know if he's more nationalistic than Putin, but he's much more, I guess, the kind of he's not like tongue-tied. He's not like tongue-tied about it. He's a lot more open about it. But he's arguing from a like ultra patriotic position, which is that the ruling elite of this country is incompetent. They care about just plundering, and using the budget and to enrich themselves with the budget. We are here, the patriots, the fighters, at the front, dying. We're being killed. We're dying because of their mistakes. And also saying that, like, I mean, this is probably one of the more interesting aspects of what he said. He said that like the war, the invasion of of Kiev, or attempted invasion of Kiev in February 2020. What's 2020, right? I can't even remember what year we're in anymore. Wasn't necessary. That he said that there was no threat coming from the Ukrainian side. There wasn't like a buildup of forces. Ukraine wasn't like in a position to imminently attack Russia. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He says that the war was launched essentially for the benefit of this ruling security elite, and for them to like bask in the glory of a good war that they fucked up. I mean, there's some truth, I think, about it. I mean, I don't know if they're actually, they wanted just the glory, but I think his point about that there was no threat to Russia at that moment, and that they were lying to the Russian people about Ukraine being sort of ready to launch this invasion of Russia, and that needed to be stopped. He calls them out on the sly. I mean, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty direct. He's got a lot of people who, I don't know, that message reached millions and millions of Russian people. I mean, a lot of people in sort of this Russian kind of war commentariat that's sort of Russian war bloggers or Russian war influencers that sort of popped up after this war. I mean, they really were in love with Wagner before this thing, but they quickly turned on him because they ultimately sided with the regime and with Putin's government, and thought that he was sowing instability. But I think generally his appeals to this is sort of right populist appeals to appeals to the people, because
didn't he say things that were sort of like, almost like Debsian, right? Like, Eugene Debs says, like, the rich declare wars, like the poor fight them. He was saying things like of that nature too. It's ironic because remember, folks, that like this is like a very powerful and well-off guy.
He's a billionaire. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because I think the bulk of his money came from lucrative contracts to feed the Russian troops. So he's a food contractor, the Ministry of Defense. Like, he his catering company provides foods to military bases and to barracks and things like that. and to Russian schools around the country. So he is this like he was made a billionaire by his access and connections to the military and industrial complex, or to the state. So it's interesting for him to go against those very structures, which is kind of confusing, and maybe hints at something kind of a deeper play of some kind. I know that like some people who are on his side. I mean, look, these are just all rumors swirling around sort of Russian Telegram channels. Various people with various levels of access, or various levels of insight. But a lot of people think that this was not just like him acting, by himself. That he was a kind of a front man for some interests, within the Russian deep state that were testing the waters for a coup. I mean, these are what people think, some people think happened. Again, we don't fucking know. We don't know anything. And anyone who tells you they know is lying, so it is what it is. But it's clearly, I mean, just from my own analysis of this, whatever the superficial analysis that I can make, is that I don't think it's very good for the Russian state and for for Putin's rule, because it does show him being kind of weak, and that the fact that something like that could happen, and also him being kind of soft about it. He doesn't come out and just be like, okay, we're gonna slaughter you. Like this is, you do this, you're dead. Like your families are dead. I don't know. You're like, your grandparents are dead. That kind of stuff. Or he was very soft about it. At first he declared them traitors and who are betraying their country and are aiding the enemy. But after this deal with Lukashenko was made, and Wagner kind of disbanded and returned back to their bases, and agreed essentially to be partially disbanded and partially integrated into the Russian Ministry of Defense, Putin, went and called Wagner soldiers heroes, Wagner commanders who were fighting for Russia in Ukraine, and were dying for Russia in Ukraine, and making sacrifices for Russia in Ukraine. So he was praising them, at the same time saying that some of them made a mistake. They made a terrible mistake. They were led astray, but they're patriots and they're good people. It's a very I don't know if this is like just his strategy of like praising them, diffusing the situation, and then later kind of whacking everybody when the state pulls down. But regardless, I mean, him having to come on and make these addresses on TV, on consecutive days, he rarely does that. He rarely shows up on TV to do these kinds of things. So it does make him clearly that he's shaken by it. It's I don't know I don't know if this makes him stronger. Definitely makes him not stronger, I think.
Yeah, the nature of the critique just seems kind of worrisome. If I was doing a war, like you're calling my general a pussy and saying that he misled me into this, and then I'm just supposed
to do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then so you talk about the populism and and what's your sense of like, and to the sense you can have gathered it, morale, whether it's the Russian people or the folks who are like Wagner, I take it like, or I understand, has taken like folks out of prisons and put them on the front lines and use that for a type of war. Like that sort of discussion of this is all pointless. Like that's not something you want out there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, well, first of all, I don't know. From like a point of view, if you're running a state and you have a big carceral state with a pretty large prison population, a violent prison population, I mean, and you're waging a war, it's not a bad idea to send your comics out there, because they're going to get, especially you send them out there, most of them get killed. Some of them don't, and they return, and they're not free, and they're out and about, even more traumatized and scary and crazy. And there have been instances already of like, these sort of ex-cons who've gotten out for murder or rape, and have served their time on the front and are like out in cities and are getting again like in pretty violent situations. So that's going to happen. I mean, what's happening with this war is it's creating a hardened, veteran, very nationalistic, ultra patriotic class of people. If this war ever ends, they're going to enter society. They're going to enter politics. They're going to become figures in society. They're going to influence society in some kind of way. And So I mean, I think this whole war is just going to lurch the entire country, most likely, to in that direction, just because there's no countervailing ideology in Russia. I mean, the thing about what I think, because I didn't predict this war. In fact, I believe that it was going to happen, just because my whole understanding of Putin and his ruling elite was that they kind of made a deal with, like, it's all about consumer capitalism, essentially, and kind of the promise of slightly increasing standard of living for the population, and access to a kind of a consumerist lifestyle, and essentially a stability, offering the Russian people stability in their lives, something that they've lacked, something that the generation that was kind of is alive now has lacked. And this is why he's been insanely popular domestically. It's why people will support him even if they don't like him, because he's delivered. He's delivered on a kind of a more or less prosperous society. Russia is poor, is a very poor country. It's actually a very rich country, but its riches are extremely unfairly distributed, and so people kind of are okay with this oligarchy that owns everything, that controls everything, and that has this very rapacious lifestyle, as long as some of that trickles down to the rest of the people, and there's clear growth in standard of living and things like that. And so with this war, he put all that at risk. But maybe he's not so wrong in launching this war, because what's happened is that kind of lifestyle, just capitalism, is not necessarily enough to give people meaning in their lives. As we know from our experience in America, from life here in America, people need something else, a deeper connection to something. And nationalism, patriotism is a very effective, deeper ideology that kind of transcends all that. And so, he sort of like lurched Russia in a way into a more patriotic mode, into a more nationalistic mode, which and ultimately, might strengthen his rule, or the rule of his ruling elite, whatever comes after him.
Well,
but him.
No, I mean, I just wanted to ask you on that, because I mean, like, what this does to people's ideology and maybe, the longevity potentially of the state is one thing, but like, I mean, this is, a massive embarrassment for Putin and the ruling institutions there. In the US, there's like this kind of like two competing narratives about Russia. One that, like, Russia is basically in terminal decline in the sense of like how powerful its state is, and then at the same time, it's like Russia is like this extremely powerful authoritarian state. I mean, could you I don't want to make you speculate too much about like what this does, but you could give people like an understanding, like, how much power does the state have, contemporarily in people's lives? Because like something like this makes it seem like the state apparatus is fairly weak if you're having a march like this.
I mean, well, I don't know. It's a good question, because there's different aspects of the state, right? So, I mean, just let's say on the economic front, because everybody was expecting, Russia's economy to completely collapse, right? After the sanctions, after these really hardcore sanctions, probably, and most people in Russia believed that the economy was going to collapse. Like, I have a couple of good friends who live in St. Petersburg who run these little businesses and stuff, and they were like, oh shit, we are fucked. Like, what are we going to do? I have my whole family's here. I don't have money to, run to like Europe somewhere. I'm here, and they were like expecting the worst to happen. And I just actually spoke to my friend a couple of days ago, right after this Wagner group, march on Moscow happened. And he was saying, yeah, like the economy is just, everything's great, everything's going well. Like there's business, there's money, there's customers, there's like, there's credit available. Like it's a vibrant economy. Like things are not going down, at least in most sectors that he's aware of. And so, unlike the economic front, it seems like Russia is actually managing things very well, like the internal domestic economy. The central bank has managed this crisis, from Russia's perspective, I think very well. Now, and so I think the economy, at the same time, there are, I think, there's so they've managed it much better than people expect them to manage it. And so I think to say that the state is just crumbling, I don't think that's true. I think over the last 10 years, a lot of Russia, I mean, everything in Russia essentially starts in Moscow, and kind of spreads outward, because that's where that's where all the money is, that's where all the power is. And so I don't know, if you go to Moscow, you'd be surprised how extremely effective it is. I mean, it's more effective. It's extremely efficient. Like, I mean, all the, like, it's all modern. All the city is extremely clean. The city is extremely well managed in terms of, like, if the snow falls on the ground, it's cleaned immediately. The bus system has been expanded. There's, they're adding capacity in the subway system in an insane way, almost like on a China level. Just adding new stations, new entire, like, rings around the city. All the subways are very clean, well functioning. There's, like, Wi-Fi. I don't know. All the buses have Wi-Fi. You can, like, track everything on a smartphone. It's like, it's all connected. So it's actually the city is run really well. Like, there's, and part of it is the one of the reasons is because Putin has these kind of several, groups of very efficient sort of neoliberal managers. The mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, he's an extremely efficient manager, and he's, like, turned Moscow into this almost like a extremely well functioning European city. Again, Moscow has a lot of money, but that stuff is expanding also to St. Petersburg. So I think it would be unfit. I think it would be it's not right to think that Russia is just, like, a country that's on the verge of collapsing and its state institutions are completely very weak. I'd say that its army was shown to be probably weaker than expected. Its intelligence clearly was shown to be subpar in terms of the belief that they could just take Kiev and just waltz into Kiev with no backup plan and just take it and everything would be okay. But at the same time, Russia isn't losing. It's not winning, but it's like, the West is pouring a lot of resources into Ukraine, and Russia is holding its ground. It's okay, so it's not like has lightning victories, but at the same time, it's not crumbling. It's not like you don't see huge protests of people outside, or people are. It's not having trouble really finding people to sign up for the war, and at least for now, it's like finding enough capacity. Okay, fine, it's going to, like, the prison population and all that stuff. But again, it's waging the war. So I don't know. It's tricky to say. I think it's hard to say, but I think it's wrong to say that Russia is sort of institutionally very weak. But at the same time, just to finish my thought here, my extended thought. I mean, there is a kind of a problem with Russia, which I think, because it's such a personal government in terms of everything's kind of built on these personal relationships from the top going down, that if these personal relationships start to break apart, or there's a kind of a warfare within that structure, it could, in theory, break down very quickly. But again, I don't know. Again, there's probably, like, several different theories of political science theories about how these things work, and so far most of the predictions of political scientists have been wrong in relation to Russia. And so I think Russia is not collapsing. It's not going to collapse tomorrow. It's not going to collapse next year. It probably won't ever collapse. In the way that we think it will. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, you in that year anniversary podcast with Evgenia, you talked about the change in affect with Putin. He was much more nervous and seems to be growing more confident. I want to talk about now, like, kind of what this says about us and how we've reacted to this. Like,
wait, sorry, man, not to
ahead.
cut you off, but just, like, before we jump there, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So for the Wagner group, I mean, that's done, right? What's the future of that look? Sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
From I think it's done. From what I understand, the deal with Lukashenko essentially dissolved the Wagner group, and I think that again, I don't know how accurate this is, but those Wagner soldiers who took part in this sort of march on Moscow, this freedom riot, the Freedom Riders, they might be chilling in Belarus. I don't know what they're going to be doing there. Hopefully, they're not going to send them to. Maybe they'll be sent to a special camp, where they're going to relax and never come back from it again. But the ones that didn't take part in the coup, I think, are just going to be absorbed into the official Ministry of Defense formations. That's what I understand, at least as far as as of yesterday evening. But who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Wagner is probably no more. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I imagine that Putin will take a hard look at kind of at other these sort of private military corporations, or these paramilitary groups, and maybe rein them in a bigger way. It's funny too, because I mean, in Ukraine, you could see a similar thing happen in Ukraine. During when 2014, after Maidan, there were all of these private military organizations funded by various oligarchs. And they were essentially functioning outside of official military control, and were private armies. And ultimately, most of them were either disbanded or were absorbed into official ministry, official military structures. Yeah, it's funny too, man. It is. I have to just mention it, just because I think it's just it just gives you a sense of how absurd, I don't know, post-Soviet politics and post-Soviet culture is, in that whole space, and how like identity and all these things. I don't know how much it matters. I mean, so Ukraine, right, has a Jewish president, Zelensky, and it's like Ukraine. Ukraine ever since 2014 has had a very big nationalistic turn in its culture. Just a lot of the cultural signifiers, a lot of slogans that were essentially associated with the very, very, very far right of Ukraine, groups that had been, had collaborated with the Nazis and were fascists, like real fascists, that came up between World War I and World War II. They've become kind of mainstream, and it's totally normal for a Jewish president to say their slogans, and so Prigozhin is also Jewish, and so he's like head of this Wagner group, is again a German composer, who's got favorite of a certain set of of people in Germany, and one of his top lieutenants is like this guy who, I mean, I don't know, like if reports about him are to be believed, he's got like giant swastikas on his fucking body, and his boss is a Jew, and so it's like. And I don't know if actually Prigozhin even identifies as Jewish, because it doesn't really, again, in the Soviet Union, like just because you're Jewish or half Jewish or whatever didn't mean that it didn't really matter to you potentially. And so Prigozhin is fighting this kind of nationalistic Russian war against its nationalistic neighbor. It's kind of it's a comedy, it's comic, and it's just shows you how mixed up everything is, and like it's hard to I don't know, man. It's like hard to just hard to paint things in black and white.
I mean, this is why, Yasha, this is why I, appreciate your perspective, because I think like it's pretty unseemly to see people treat this as an opportunity for partisan enthusiasm as opposed to like just depressing. And, we don't talk about that much, because if I call it an unjust invasion, I get people calling me a NATO shill. And if I say like, I want to look into like, what we've been doing to antagonize sorts of things, or including like understand this as a proxy war where major powers are getting comfortable with. Can you just talk about how you approach that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it has to be complex. It's a complex thing. I mean, I think this is essentially there's truth, and it's undeniable that like the American political or security elite, because I don't know if the business elite is even on board with this, to be honest. Right. Just like in Europe, it's very strange, But again, the sort of national security elite of the country does see Ukraine as a kind of proxy for its war on Russia, and almost like a wedge or a crowbar or something you can kind of like pry Russia open and spill out its guts, and keep it weak. This is just a reality. I mean, the people say this quite openly. The political class in America says this quite openly. And there's a whole long history, of America essentially disregarding any kind of concerns of sort of post-Soviet Russia, starting from Yeltsin, through Putin, about the expansion of NATO, and sort of aggressive moves on the part of NATO and America. And completely just disregarding, like treating Russia as like just some kind of peasant that you can just sort of kick around, and like it's and that you lost the war, you lost the Cold War. Just shut the fuck up. Get in the proper place in the pecking order. And so there's just truth to that, and the fact that so there's, and I've written a lot about this before the war, but there's the other side of it too, which is, I have because I'm Russian, and and I grew up in America, and my half of my family is Russian. My wife's born and raised in Moscow. We have like this slightly more complicated perspective on it. So if you're American, you don't really see the Russian side of it at all. It's like, for you, it's like just very vague about, you just see everything through America's perspective. And so, but we see also from the Russian perspective, and the Russian perspective, this was a dumb, unprovoked war in a way. It was provoked, but the response that Putin decided to go on, to do, was a really disastrous, a really bad one, and it was probably the worst way of dealing with this from my perspective, because what it does is it changes Russian society in a major way. What it did is it's made the country a lot more, a lot more authoritarian. It's the reality. It's bolstered the most reactionary, nationalistic, toxic elements of society. It made dissent in any kind of way, like just, untenable. People don't do it. In private they do it. Some people are, post stuff on Facebook still, but probably almost no one does. A lot of people that I know who are in academia, who are sort of who were in this very, very small left-wing kind of movement in Russia, most all of them have left the country, because they know that if they, like, not only can't you criticize the war now, but retroactively things can be found against you. So most of those people left. So it's actually emptied the country out of a lot of some of the more sort of interesting opposition to the regime, and it's made the country a lot more just intolerant and a worse place to live. I don't think people understand that. Like, I know that in America, there's like, what's the closest sort of comparison? Probably most recent would be like the Iraq War, but yeah, okay, Iraq War protesters were arrested, and I participated in the Iraq War protest in 2003, and a bunch of my friends, changed themselves together and blocked traffic and got arrested. But you could, run a pretty successful blog where you can criticize the war, and no one was, knocking down your house and dragging you into jail. So it created a Russia, just in terms of just culturally, it sort of denuded it in terms of just the kind of culture, and left in its place a nationalistic, xenophobic kind of, concentrated those elements of society. And so it made Russia worse from my perspective, and from the perspective of people that I know and respect, So whether or not, it's like, I sometimes ask this question: if it's like, let's say like the left or something in America, would they, if let's say it was discovered that China put a base of some kind, or like it's done now, like the news came out that China put a spy base, and it has a spy base or some kind of spy base in Cuba. Would everyone agree that's on the left, in America, the 5 or 10 people that are on the left in this country, would they agree that America is justified to go on and like bomb Cuba and wipe it off the face of this earth? So that's a justified invasion just because, a rival power is threatening you on your border? Of course they wouldn't, right? They would condemn it as they condemned it in the past, right? And so I think, it's that case. I think with the problem with a lot of Americans' perspective, is that it's in a way it's very provincial in the sense that they can't see beyond their own little world, and everything is about America and American politics and domestic politics. And so, that's why you have these sort of Republicans suddenly becoming anti-war on just this Ukraine issue, just because they see it can be sold as a Biden war, right? Meanwhile, they're hawkish on every other war, that America,
No, that's like the case with a lot of the right wingers. Just like, we're just not prosecuting war well, right? We have the wrong enemy,
exactly.
Right?
If this was someone else, exactly. And so I think that it's been a disaster for the country. Not in the sense that it's collapsed economically, but just I think culturally. And it's kind of a problem with Russia. If you analyze Russian history, and Soviet history, it's been a problem, and there's part of this country where like the most interesting people, that are always like purged out of society, and that happened in the Soviet Union. very quickly after the revolution, there were huge purges, and basically anyone with any kind of fucking brain and any kind of interesting idea got fucking whacked or just got driven out of the country. It's just the reality, and it's sort of what's happening now as well. I mean, most of the people who are fleeing are, of course, I don't know, like liberal Russians who are pretty reactionary themselves in a different way. They're basically like libertarians, and socially conservative, a lot of them, and kind of would be considered to be like Fox News Republicans, in America. But they're opposed to Putin for cultural reasons. A lot of them have fled. If they could get out and get a job in America, or could sort of transfer to some kind of job in America, like in the tech sector or something, or there's been a lot of movement like that. But also it expelled a lot of people who are pretty interesting. And if there was a future in that country, there's basically not a left in Russia. I mean, it was tiny to begin with, and whatever like left energy that existed got siphoned to into the nationalist world. So, so it's really I don't know, like as someone who's sees nationalism as a kind of is almost like a modern curse, because it's an ideology that has such staying power and kind of transcends, can coexist very, very easily with various economic systems, and seems so natural to us. If at this point, it seems like nationalism is almost like, I don't know, it's organic. It's not like to make a country even more nationalistic is a major problem for me, and so I think so I can see you have to look at this war from different sides, and just like there isn't like a good guy essentially here.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Yasha, I appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on. I want to talk Surveillance Valley and some of your Russiagate reporting. But folks, at Yasha Levine, we'll link to the Substack. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for
having me. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
That reminds me of a talk I had with Michael about was it brutalization? And that word, our sort of Duke Nukem generation thinks of it as just like, oh, you're just shooting a rocket launcher, but it's actually a process through which people become more and more coarse. And like that's something I try to keep it like. You can't make like Steven Crowder more coarse, so like you go at it, but like there's a certain type of thing, and this war is exactly that. Like our war has fucked us up too. Like war is not actually typically. I mean, I guess there's 1917, but Putin himself is like not like basically beyond. He calls himself Nicholas II, I believe.
Yes, he does, which is very amazing. And if you remember when he like made his justification for the war in Ukraine, like a lot of it was this long condemnation of Lenin.
Right. Even this most recent thing, I think he's like condemning Lenin. So yeah, I mean, no, but, like, it's depressing. I really recommend the Russians podcast. But go ahead, David.
No, it's super good, and like I think we should just have Yasha on and talk about this later, because on another note, it's connected, but even before the invasion, like I'll never forget one moment that like I don't know, just like I think it's really important not to get yourself like spooked all the time, right? Just like what we were talking about earlier with like the socialists and the communists not being welcome in the US, blah blah blah. Understand what it is, so don't start freaking out yet, but also know that things can move really fast. And like a really visceral moment for me, I remember when I was still living in New York, is during the World Cup in Russia. And for people who don't follow soccer, not gonna get into it, but like Russia was like the underdog team, right? Not like a great, at least in recent history, like soccer power, and they had like a decent run. And usually, when the home country has like a decent run, fair weather fans jump on and cheer for them. I was at a bar in Park Slope, and for people who don't know New York, like that's like the very wealthy, kind of liberal, a lot of pride flags, a lot of Ukraine flags now. And I was at a bar there, and there was this Russian woman who was sitting there watching the camera who they were playing. She was cheering for Russia at the World Cup, which is like one of the most fun things in New York, is that like you actually have people from those countries like watching at the bar with you. And the entire crowd started harassing this woman in like a really awful, horrific way. And it, that's always like there's always that underbelly in American society, I guess. But just seeing that bubble up, particularly with a group of people who I generally would suspect would consider themselves to be like progressives or something like that, right? It's frightening to see those kind of like nationalisms and like national prejudices. This is your neighbor, right? And it's frightening to realize that those kind of things like still exist. Not to be naive about them, but like, yeah,
history's actually real. Like there's actually the real world happening out there, and yeah, and again, like I like this. The sort of victory of capitalism that we were birthed into was, again, read Jakarta Method
Mhm.
by Vincent Bevins. I mean, our own so the COINTEL history domestically. Um, it's not. It doesn't just win on its own,
Mhm.
right? And so these sorts of things, like, they become necessary, and so to like uh and I like, even I think some of the like like whatever the intention, if it's just to avoid an attack ad, the next thing, that does not cut it. Like, you cannot f around with stuff like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, anyways, it was great having Yash on. Maybe we should definitely try to do it again soon and look at some of these things. Um, Before we go to the post game, folks, and you can join us at patreon.com/left reckoning to hang out with us. We got some fun stuff coming. We'll be taking calls and questions as well. Two quick things. One, for people in Austin, if you haven't seen or haven't been aware, and I believe also in Kansas as well, nurses who won a union and have been negotiating a contract here went on strike today, and to try to force ascension to the bargaining table. These nurses, like many nurses across the country, face brutal working conditions, 14-hour shifts. They're underpaid, and they need more. And this mobilization of nurses, I think, is something that's very, very exciting, and you should definitely be supporting them. And shout out to them. Just play a quick 10-second video here from this morning. This is from Gus Bova, former Left Reckoning guest. Hopefully, we'll have him on again soon. And Greg Casar, also a left progressive congressman from the area, speaking.
With this strike is an act of solidarity.
And there's much more there. So solidarity to them, it's really important and exciting. There's tremendous amounts of community support, and essentially should jump on the bargaining table. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is a critical service for people. Has a lot of public support too. You don't want to be on the other side of that if you're Ascension.
And it's alarming that nurses. I kind of get that the attack on teachers is so harsh because it's thought control, mind control. This effort to go at teachers, bro, you use hospital beds too. I don't care if you don't want to hear about Thomas Jefferson slaves. Like, you want nurses that are able to take fucking breaks, and the people that lead these hospital companies are actual psychos. Like, we make movies, genres out of different kinds of monsters, vampires, Draculas, werewolves. These people kill way more than any of those monsters do, right? By signing documents saying, actually, you know what? We don't need those beds. Actually, you know what? Don't need those nurses. That's way scarier than one guy with one knife, and a scream mask, chasing after one person.
No, totally. That's threatening your mama, your grandma, your entire family.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, we'll keep our eye on that and keep covering, but want to do a quick shout out. But before we go to the post game, Matt, this is going to feature Greg Casar again. But this is just so good. All right. Our illustrious governor. And also, if you didn't read my article in Jacobin, please do. I wrote a piece with Alex Burnell about HB 2127. We had him on the show last week to talk about it. In depth, which is one of the nastiest and most frightening anti-democratic bills that's been passed in a long while. add to that the just blatant war on queer and trans people in the state of Texas and across many states across the U.S. These are times where it's really important to be able to be out there and show solidarity with your friends and neighbors. But for fun, we have to look at this because this is pretty impressive. So Greg Casar tweeted out, and he retweeted Greg Abbott, who deleted this tweet. Governor Abbott just accidentally posted a satire article because he wants to hate on queer Texans and Garth Brooks so bad. For people who don't know Garth Brooks, well, you should know who Garth Brooks is. I mean, he's one of the most famous artists, best-selling. He's up there with the Beatles. And Michael Jackson is one of the greatest selling artists of all time. He has always sort of been one of these people who usually shows up on the right side, right? Maybe not like a radical revolution or anything like that, but on social issues, like
it's Chris Gaines who is the Marxist.
Yeah, Chris Gaines is the Marxist and the sex addict, which also Chris Gaines might be coming back, but that's not the focus of the segment. So Abbott tweets, and anyways, Garth Brooks has basically not jumped on the trend on attacking queer and trans folks, and is that in fact affirmed them. And of course, the right wing has been having a breakdown about it. My governor tweeted this out. Garth Brooks booed off stage at 123rd annual Texas Country Jamboree. Go woke, go broke. Garth called his conservative fans assholes. Good job, Texas. And if you are listening to this later, the name of the website is the DunningKrugerTimes.com.
Beautiful.
And I have to pull up this article, Matt, because it's funny enough that just from the title of the website, you should know that it's a bullshit satire piece. But check out this website because it is the most classic. Look, before the article, we got foil round doorknobs went alone. Here's why.
Oh my God. And sorry, just that other one. Would you support the impeachment of Joe Biden if he opened Social Security to legal immigrants? You know what's actually going on with benefits and illegal immigrants? They pay into the system and don't fucking take out.
But this is like a fake website. I think it's probably run by like a liberal. But when Garth Brooks took the stage at the 123rd annual Texas Country Jamboree in Hambriston, where's Hambriston, Texas? Let's see.
Hambriston, okay.
Hambriston, Texas. I usually know this state. Oh, actually, it looks like that doesn't exist. So just an absolutely made up story. For 22 years, Garth Brooks has been the headliner of this event, said Toby Keith, after Brooks was booed off stage. But we really can't keep pretending he's playing.
So he's been headlining an event in Hambriston, Texas for 22 years.
This made up town.
And it hasn't made the news.
Years. Toby Keith is correct, Patriots. Garth Brooks left the real country scene the day he decided to play a set in Central Park. He thought he would attract his fans from the surrounding rural areas, but instead he learned liberals just love him. And it goes on for a while.
Sorry, is that like Dylan Goes Electric when Garth Brooks played in Central Park?
Also, all of these guys play big shows in New York. In fact, one of the members of Montgomery Gentry, famously died in a helicopter crash in New York City. But I mean, this is beautiful to me. Biden owned by this video. I mean, just like all the hallmarks of an absolutely fake website.
I mean, borderline written by AI.
I think very likely written by AI. I'm sad. I guess these are all sponsored Google ads. Earlier today, there was a really good one that just had a bottle that was filled with some black sludge, and it said, "Please stop putting this in your coffee," which is like.
It's that whole genre of local news scare stories where they're like, after the break, this household cleaner that is probably under your sink could kill all your children in the next 45 minutes. And it's like, watch after these ads.
So, Governor Abbott again losing and embarrassing himself and the state of Texas with this. Also, this piece is written by a man named Flag Eagleton Patriot. Which also
great work by that guy,
serious this is.
Future Sunday show guest.
So anyways, that's our quick Texas update, folks. We're going to go to the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning. Leave us a voicemail if you have anything you want to talk about at 1940-289-7234. We will be over there in about 10-15 minutes or so. I'll be back this Thursday with a Griscom stream, and for everyone else, we'll see you soon.
See you, folks.